All right, I am live. Actually, and I'm not live. I'm recording with my good friend, Dr. Michael Bird, and I've got so many stories about Mike Bird. We actually go way back to my early Aberdeen days. I'm going to say around 2000, maybe 5, when
Yeah.
you were teaching at Highland Theological College out on the coast of Loch Ness, literally, or on the shore, right by Loch Ness. And you came out to Aberdeen. We hit it off, got our families together, and we've been friends from a distance largely ever since. So for those who don't know who Mike Bird is, why don't you give an intro to who you are and the kind of work that you're interested in? I'm sure that'll lead to all kinds of other conversations we can chase down.
Yeah, my name's Mike Bird. I am Australian. I'm an Anglican priest, New Testament scholar and theologian. I write, teach, publish in those areas of biblical studies, and I enjoy hanging out with my friends like Preston Sprinkle, and that's pretty much what I do for a living. I should say I also teach at Ridley College.
Right. And you've been at you did your PhD in Queensland.
Yep.
Then you got hired on directly, if I remember correctly, to Highland in Scotland, right? Right after your PhD.
It is literally top theological college in the United Kingdom. I mean, geographically, you tend to the north of it. There is, unless they established the Arthur School of Theology, it is literally the top theological college in the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Your audio is fading out. It was great before we hit record. Now it's a little sketchy. Any changes or?
I haven't touched nothing.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's good. Okay.
I'll lean forward.
So if I can sum up Mike Bird, I mean, you produce more content than anybody I've probably ever met. Now, as you know from being in the UK scholars are typically kind of skeptical of, in particular, Americans who like to write like 2 books a year. There's so much kind of capitalism wrapped up into that, and money and all this stuff. And I remember Simon Gathercall, who my advisor and a friend of both of ours, he said, my one advice to you is don't overwrite, write a book every 5 years, maybe, and I haven't really lived by that, but I understand the concern. Now, long story short, what makes you unique, in my opinion, is that you produce a ton of stuff, but it's so high quality across a diverse spectrum of disciplines. Like, you're writing on Paul, you're writing on Jesus, you're doing early church stuff, you're doing theology, biblical theology, systematics, even more recently. So I don't know if I know any, but maybe NT Wright, maybe, who produces such high quality with such high quantity that's also high quality. How do you do that? How do you produce such high quality academic books in such high quantity? I know you don't sleep very much, right? Or
well, I sleep better than I used to. Better than I used to. I think there's a number of factors. The first thing you have to remember is I live inside my head. The external world is just the matrix. So for me, the real world is inside my head, and this is just where I come to set people free. Secondly, in that vein, it feels such a shame. I've got all these ideas in my head. It feels such a shame to keep them all to myself. I could be sharing this love and what I've learned with so many others. So I guess that's part of it. The other thing is, when I spent some time in the army and I worked in military intelligence, and one of the things you develop the skill is to absorb copious amounts of information. You then have to very quickly analyze it, synthesize it, and then disseminate it in a very quick fashion, because people's lives matter. Based on what you do with information. So I learned a skill very quickly of processing a lot of information, analyzing, synthesizing it, and somewhat, and then getting it to the people who needed to hear it. And I did that for several years, and so which was probably one of the best ways of preparing for a career in research. So that's probably the thing. And I've got wide-ranging interests. Jesus, Paul, the early church, the apostolic fathers, the Septuagint, systematics, biblical theology, and I just like working and writing in multiple fields. And I like the idea of being a generalist rather than spending
Yeah.
5 years working on Luke Acts. I prefer working on a wide spectrum
Yeah.
of areas. Now, the danger is you can end up doing that somewhat superficially, but
Yeah.
eventually the knowledge you acquire in all these different areas eventually feeds in all together. So when you write on someone like Paul, you're doing it with a much wider and broader perspective, which informs it.
So you've written, I mean, several. Gosh, how many books? I mean, you've probably written. I'm looking at your Wikipedia page. By the way, Mike Bird has a Wikipedia page. I didn't know that.
It's not by me. Not by me.
I always wonder that. Like, how do people get Wikipedia pages? Just like one of your fans and followers says, I need to, post something here. But how many not edited books? Because you've edited a few books. We worked on a project together. But you've written books by yourself. I mean, are you up in like the teens, the 20s? How many books have you lost track?
I think all up with edited books, it's about 30, but I think in terms of just books by me, it's about 20.
I mean, and again, I can't emphasize enough the difference between writing an academic book versus, compiling a bunch of sermons. Like some, and not to detract away from the need for popular level books, okay? But to put together a sermon series, spin it into a book, if you have a mega church, any publisher is going to say, yeah, if we can, sell tens of thousands of copies because you got to have a big platform, we'll publish your book. Doesn't really matter what it is. We'll just publish it because it'll sell. And, but to write an academic book, I mean, takes a ton of, again, some academic books take 5-10 years to write. Yeah. You have, I think all your books would be considered academic, right? You don't have any like,
some of them would be very textbooky.
Okay.
Like they meant like for first year seminary students. Some of them are obviously a little bit more technical, like a commentary on First Esdras according to Codex Vaticanus.
Wait,
which
is that
no
a thing?
surprise
You actually wrote a book on that? That's a book you've written?
Yeah.
First Esdras?
First Esdras. On Codex Vaticanus.
My audience might not even know what that even means. Can you unpack
that?
That's
a book. That's a book from the Apocrypha. That's basically most of Ezra, part of Nehemiah, and a couple of other apocryphal stories that have been thrown together in Greek.
And you wrote a commentary on that?
Yeah.
Who had a gun to your head to force you to write?
Oh, well, it was when I was in Scotland that, how the universities have to produce these highbrow, very academic pieces that nobody reads. Okay. So while I was in Scotland, I committed to one of those projects. So again, it's, for about the 15 people who care about one Esdras, my book is, kind of like the latest thing from about 5 or 6 years ago now. But for the rest of the English-speaking world, it never really happened.
I actually dreamed, during my PhD, I dreamed of writing a commentary either on the Psalms of Solomon or Pseudo-Philo. I have since left that dream, although there's still that itch that's always there in my heart, even though I've moved on to more kind of in between popular academic level stuff. But I get it, man. I don't know, just pursuing the knowledge, the study of something that might play a tiny sliver in understanding the Bible, but still somebody needs to do that sliver. And I just have so much mad respect for people that are going to do that. I mean, Simon Gathercole said, I think we need an actual Christian who's an expert in the Gospel of Thomas. So he's taught himself Coptic and spent 5 years studying this and produced a commentary on the Gospel of Thomas. And I think that is a small sliver, and yet such a massive, respectable sliver that is needed in the church. So
there's something about going through an ancient text, an ancient Jewish text, Coptic or whatever, and just working through it methodically, at the level of its language, its sources, what it's doing, at looking at the various manuscripts in close detail, and then thinking, and how does this tell us anything about the history of Judaism or early Christianity? That was the best thing. I mean, from that one Esdras, although it's a very technical academic, I really did learn a lot about ancient Judaism. I learned a lot about ancient manuscripts from doing it, and it did feed into sort of other things I've done in the future.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I still look back on my PhD days when we first met, and how much time I spent lingering in early Jewish literature. I mean, I must have, I don't know how many hundreds, maybe thousands of hours I spent in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I just the other day, I kind of cracked open my paperback copy of the 2-volume, who the Garcia Martinez, is that?
Yeah.
And man, the notes I took in there, the highlights, the underlines, you would think I was like a convert to Qumran Judaism, like it was more marked up than my copy of Romans. But those I don't know, like, and some people would say, gosh, why would you spend so much time meditating on that kind of material? And I don't know if I'd have space for that in my life now, but I have zero regrets of that. Like, that's just, I learned so much about the New Testament ultimately, and Jesus ultimately, by truly understanding Jewish material on its own terms, not just as like backdrop material, but actually trying to get inside the head of these.
Yeah. I'm the same. I mean, my Dead Sea Scrolls, I went through and underlined every reference to Gentiles, Romans, the dreaded kingdom. So, I wanted to know what Jews thought about the fate of Gentiles, because I wrote my PhD thesis on Jesus and the Gentiles. So, I was the same thing. I spent like copious amounts of hours doing that. I'll tell you what was sad for me. I had this huge chapter on, Gentiles in the Jewish world, what Jews were saying about Gentiles. And I'd spent like, months working on that chapter, but I had to cut it out of PhD thesis when it got published because there was no room for it. And that felt like losing a limb, which is why I then resurrected it as a separate volume about Jewish missionary activity in the ancient world.
Yeah, so tell us about briefly. I don't want to go so deep that my audience turns off the podcast, but sum up your both your dissertation, your thesis, and during your PhD, and also that second book that you were just referencing, because that's a sub discipline within New Testament studies that 99% of Christians aren't even aware of, and yet it works.
Here's the problem I dealt with. Jesus was Jewish. All of his followers were Jewish. It was a very Jewish movement, located largely in Jerusalem and a bit of Galilee. But within 40 years, it's become pretty much a Gentile religion. This is what Christianity. It's gone from being a kind of messianic sect to effectively a Gentile religion in the Greco-Roman world. And how do you get from A to B? Now, of course, everyone says, well, there's all the Apostle Paul and all that, and his mission to the Gentiles. But what happened at A? What was happening with Jesus that would turn this Jewish restoration movement into a religion that would incorporate, Romans and Greeks into it? And basically, my thesis was this: Jesus was a prophet of Jewish restoration eschatology. And in other words, he came to bring to fulfillment those great promises from Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel about the new Exodus, the new Israel, the redemption of God's people. And in that story, a transformed Israel would transform the world. God's people, when they were renewed, would be the conduit for the renewal of the world. So that's the basic story that Jesus was part of. And you can find that throughout the Old Testament. And that explains a lot of Jesus's interactions with Gentiles, such as the Syrophoenician woman you get in Mark 7, or the centurion you get in Matthew 8, and I believe Luke 13, and that type of thing. So I just went through and tried to explain all that. That then leads to a sort of an earlier question: to what extent were Jews trying to convert Gentiles to Judaism? Now, there was a little bit of it going on. Every now and again you get some Jews, such as in Josephus' Antiquities, chapter 20, where you get people trying to advocate Judaism to, Gentile kings. But more often than not, I think the Jews were willing to accept converts. They didn't really aggressively go out and seek them. So that there is a fairly newish proselytizing thrust in the early Christian movement.
So you said there wasn't a lot of Jewish missionary activity during the Second Temple intertestamental period, or was there a little bit? I know
it all comes down to how you define missionary. But we only have spasmodic references to this happen, like Matthew 23:15, where Jesus says to the Pharisees, "You cross sea and land to make a single convert, and you make him twice the son of hell as yourselves."
Yeah. I've always wondered that. Really? Has that ever happened? A Jew?
Yeah, well, the issue is Jesus being hyperbolic? Is he exaggerating something? Are Pharisees trying to convert other Jews to Pharisaism? That sort of proselyte. Or
Sure.
is it referring to Pharisees going out trying to actually convert Gentiles to Judaism? Now, we do know of one or two Pharisees that actually did try to convert Gentiles to Judaism. You can read, Josephus's Antiquities chapter 20 to see a story about that. But from what we know of literature, generally, they were not, the Jewish people, buried everywhere, were not all that active in doing that. They were quite happy to accept converts, but didn't sort of aggressively go out seeking them.
Okay, interesting. Your latest book, which comes out, November 2019, just in time for ETS SBL, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You co-wrote with N.T. Wright. That's insane. So you're co-writing a book with N.T. Wright called The New Testament in Its World, an Introduction to the History, Literature, and Theology of the First Christians, which, by the way, I love that title. It's just provocative. It's
Yeah, the book abbreviates NTW.
yeah. Um, so it's done, obviously, because it's coming out in a couple
Yeah.
months. So what was that process like, and how did you get how'd you get the opportunity to co-write a book with N.T. Wright? That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, being asked to co-write a book with Tom Wright is like being asked to sing a duet with Beyonce. You can't say no. Even if you can't sing, you can't say no. That book came about because SPCK, as a publisher, said, "Do you have any book ideas you'd like to run past us?" And I said, "Well, I'm pretty busy and pretty full up at the moment." I said, "You should get someone to work with Tom Wright and to go through his various writings, work closely with Tom, and to construct a New Testament theology based mostly on his life's work and then just sort of supplementing it as need be." And they said, "That is a great idea. And hey, Mike, why don't you do it?" I said, "Well, yeah, I mean, I've met Tom a couple of times. We get on well. I'm a bit of a fanboy, but Tom may have his own people. He may have his own people." But they ran the idea past Tom, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that sort of a strange Aussie guy. Yeah, he seems all right." So yeah, and we got underway, and then Zondervan got on board, which meant it went from being like a small sort of black and white book to this all singing, all dancing, incredible show. We've even got like 2 DVDs coming out of the book. There's one which is a church-based curriculum called The New Testament You Never Knew, which is designed for church groups, for lay people, which is basically just me and Tom traveling around Jerusalem, Greece, Rome, talking about the New Testament and that type of thing. And then we're bringing out more of a seminary-based curriculum later down the track. And it's been a lot of fun, a great adventure. Tom is terrific to work with. It's a little bit depressing because you just see how wonderfully he writes.
Yeah.
And then I've got to add my own little thing on the side, or my own little marginal gloss here and there, that type of a thing. But it's great fun, and I think we've produced a book that will be really valuable for students, for teachers, for pastors, anyone who wants a real comprehensive overview of the New Testament in its world.
Yeah.
I think will really benefit from this book.
Well, you're being humble. I'll never forget the IBR conference. IBR. What does that even stand for? What's IBR stand for? The
Institute for Biblical Research.
Institute for Biblical Research.
Where have you been? Where you been? You're out of the game, man. Like what's SBL? Is that the Society of Baseball League or something? What's SBL?
It should be. Gosh darn it. So IBR, the Institute for Biblical Research, is, in my opinion, the highest level of evangelical biblical scholarship. And what I mean by that is a society where biblical scholars, people studying the Bible on a high academic level, who still believe that Jesus is Lord, that we should preach the gospel, that repentance is necessary for eternal life, so on and so forth. It's kind of a great combination of, well, I would say it's the perfect balance between ETS, the Evangelical Theological Society, which typically is very conservative, like, not ultra right, but very far right. and Society of Biblical Literature, where you may have a Buddhist monk who's also an atheist talking about gender theory in the book of Romans, which is fine. There's a place for that. But IBR kind of blends the academic power of SBL and the Christian the Christianity maybe of ETS, and it's a happy medium. Anyway, all that to say, IBR has an annual meeting, and several years ago, they always have one plenary speaker and then somebody who responds to the keynote address. This year, N.T. Wright was the keynote speaker, and Mike Bird was the respondent. And at that time, obviously, everybody knew who N.T. Wright was, and I would say a good percentage knew who you were. But I will never forget, bro. And I'm saying this, and you're not paying me money, but N.T. Wright gave a talk. It was good. I mean, it was N.T. Wright. It's, of course, no matter if he just opens his mouth, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
You came on and responded, and your talk was. I hope N.T. Wright's not. I'm pretty sure N.T. Wright's not listening to my podcast. If he is, I'll live with that. You were head and shoulders better than he was. I mean, you were precise. You pushed back on him. You were funny. You were I mean, it was so. I sat there in awe. I literally was thinking, I know that guy. I was like looking around, like we edited a book together. I promise you, like that guy was, you lit that room up. I mean, you had to have gotten great responses. I mean, give me just. Let's set aside humility. What were the responses like from that talk? That was an incredible.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that the most depressing thing was, like, I was on the podium, Tom finished speaking, and I think about 10% of the people got up and walked out. So that's the first thing I was encountering. I was kind of like the after dinner mince for a lot of people. But no, I did my thing, which we both know, Preston, I'm primarily a comedian. New Testament studies is just my medium. So I was able to do about 15 minutes of stand-up and interspersed with a bit of biblical studies and theological dialogue with Tom Wright, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, a lot of people said that that was terrific, that was great. I had a good time. I had a good time doing that.
So this introduction you worked on with him, and I don't know how much you can share publicly, and if you're like, I can't really speak into that, is it primarily N.T. Wright's pre-written material and you kind of putting it all together, or did he do any fresh writing for it? Are you allowed to say?
Oh, it's a bit of both. The one hand, we've gone through Tom's various works, Jesus and the Victory of God, Resurrection of the Son of God, some of his popular level commentaries. And, I've gone through all the material and basically fashioned a New Testament introduction out of it. But it hasn't just been like a cut and paste in a kind of patchy way. We've systematically worked through everything to give it a nice sense of flow, make it clear, crisp, coherent. We've got tons of pictures and tables and charts. It's very pictorial. It's very graphic. One of the good things we've got is like an ongoing conversation between a professor and an American seminary student asking questions. It's called Emails from the Edge. So, so the student will say, like, I was reading somewhere like this, the testimony of Josephus to Jesus is like, a fake or a forgery. Like, what's up with that? There's all those sorts of questions along the way. Or, what does the King James Bible mean when it says he did not consider it robbery to seek equality with God? What the heck is robbery going on here?
Yeah.
So it's got a whole bunch of good things like that. But Tom has also added a lot of unique material to this, particularly in the introduction and the end of the book. He's really added some good stuff on why the New Testament matters and what are the benefits you can get from reading it. So at one level, you could say this book is Tom Wright's greatest hits all in one volume, put in a nice, easy, readable, user-friendly fashion. It's also got my own little bits and bobs along the way as well, a bit of, bit of comedy relief, maybe a bit of eye candy on the side, however we want to put it. I don't know. But then also added to that, we've got something that shows why the New Testament actually matters. And we do start a bit of the process of asking the question, well, so what? How is the Gospel of Mark going to affect the way you eat your Wheat Bix on a Tuesday morning, that type of a thing.
Man, I can't wait. I literally can't wait to read it. How is it? It's probably pretty long, right? What, 400 or 500 pages?
I think it's about 800 pages.
Oh wow. Okay.
So it's meaty, it's rigorous, but I mean, this is a book I really hope serves a generation of students, teachers, pastors. I think this book is different to every other New Testament introduction that's going around.
How so? How so? Because there are a lot of good introductions.
Here's the thing. We don't just want to give people more information about the New Testament. Okay, it's not like here's a bunch of information, a bunch of data for you to roughly remember. We want to change the way people read the New Testament, and we want people to remember that they're reading history, they're reading literature, they're reading theology, and your objective is to take this material and find ways to live it out. And we start giving you a few tips along the way and how to do that. And I think that does make it a little bit more unique. We do try to bridge the gap between knowledge and application, and we do try to bring all these things together of how the New Testament is part of the theological message, part of a revelation, part of history, but it also has its own unique literary forms.
I mean, even at 800 pages, I mean, if any pastor or just thoughtful Christian out there, leader, I mean, you can get, if you just said, hey, I'm going to spend the year 2020 working through this book, that's just a few pages a week, really. I don't have the math in front of me. I mean, 20 pages a week, 50 pages a week, whatever. I mean, that's not that tough. And I think people would just learn tremendously from an exercise like that. So I'm going to, on the spot, I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to spend 2020 working through this, because all I read right now is on sexuality and gender. It's actually rare for me to read anything outside of that. But I think it's healthy for me to do so. So I'm gonna take that on. Let's shift gears a little bit. You're not just an academic. I mean, you are absolutely a man of the church. You still love Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, I say that, but I laugh. But I mean, a lot of people who go through the academic journey that you and I have come out on the other side at, I'm 43. I think you're 45, 44.
Yeah.
To still be like passionate about the gospel is actually more rare than people may think. Or you end up being so cynical or so liberal that you basically are kind of worth it. But you are still, I would say, a very level-headed, thoughtful, gospel-centered evangelical, in not in the American sense, but in the actual sense of being an evangelical. Tell us about your church journey. You have gone from being a Baptist to Presbyterian and now an Anglican priest. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So tell us about that journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, I did not grow up in a Christian home. Growing up, everything I knew about Christianity, I learned from Ned Flanders. So that's pretty much. So I did not have a religious upbringing. It was a little bit, it wasn't too bad. It was a bit dysfunctional, and so when I was 17, I couldn't get into college. My grades in school were not good enough. So I went and joined the army, and I did that for a number of years. And it was while I was in the army, I got invited to church for the first time. And I just assumed all churches were filled with moralizing geriatrics that were afraid somewhere, somehow, a young person was having a good time. But I went along to a Baptist church, a new church plant, and it was great. The people were very different, wonderfully different, supernaturally different, and they shared with me the good news of the gospel. And in 1994, I prayed to receive Christ, and the world's been a different place ever since. So I hung up in some Baptist circles, moved around a bit with the army, got a little bit of a taste for theological education. I initially thought I would, maybe train to be an army chaplain, maybe with an academic thing down the line. But as I went through theological college, through seminary, it became clear that my giftings were probably more on the academic side rather than on the people skill side. So I pursued the academic side, got a scholarship to do my doctorate at the University of Queensland, which was great. Jesus and the origins of the Gentile mission. And had to look for a job. Eventually got one in a wonderful place in the north of Scotland, Highland Theological College, which is still a great place. Had a great time there for 5 years. Met wonderful people like Preston and Joey and Nijay. and so many other wonderful people I've got to know over the years. Then after that, my mother-in-law threatened to break both of my legs if I didn't bring her daughter and grandchildren back to Australia. So I spent a few years. So when I was in Scotland, I mean, pretty much there's some good churches there, but you pretty much have to be Presbyterian. There's like 10 different types of Presbyterian if you want.
Right.
So I did that for a bit, and just hung out with the Presbyterians, and they kind of like beat out some of the Baptist stuff out of me too. So I thought, okay, fine, let's baptize babies. Just get over and done with. A bit of covenant theology. You're all children of Abraham. Let's baptize them. So it's a very simplistic way that will probably offend a lot of your listeners, but you can read further details in my Evangelical Theology book.
I've got a blend of Paedo-Baptist and Credo-Baptist, or however you want to word it. But I think the one thing all my listeners have in common is it's not a hill to die on. So yeah.
So I went back to the Brisbane School of Theology for a while, and I attended a Presbyterian church there, which I loved. It's still a great church. But basically, I was becoming a closet Anglophile. Because when I was in Scotland, I found out that F.F. Bruce, he's a famous biblical scholar, he kept 2 books on his desk, a Greek New Testament and a copy of the Book of Common Prayer. And I thought, well, that was pretty good for F.F. Bruce, so I might give it a try myself. So I started reading the Book of Common Prayer and learned to love it. It was so biblical. It was very Trinitarian as well, rather than the side of, the Jesus sort of monist sort of worship. In Australia, we sing a lot of Hillsong worship, kind of like, Jesus, you're terrific. For you, I'd swim the Pacific. Yeah, baby, yeah, yeah. So after you've been singing that for a while, the Book of Common Prayer can be rather refreshing in its blatant Trinitarianism. And so I wanted to move into an Anglican setting. And I got the opportunity when I was invited to join the faculty down here in Melbourne at Ridley College, which, when I was able to really cross over and join the Anglican fold. And for me, the best thing about being Anglican is you get to be Reformed and Catholic at the same time. Yeah. There's a very strong heritage of the ancient Catholic heritage of the faith, the creeds of the church fathers, the church mothers. That's all part of our heritage. But we also embrace the Reformation distinctions about the gospel. And you could argue that the Reformation was the attempt to recapture or to rehearse the apostolicity of the church, the apostolic message of the gospel. So that's why I tend to think of being Anglican as a type of reformational Catholicism, or Anglicanism at its best, not an override, at its best is what the Catholic Church would look like if it embraced the Reformation and returned to its apostolic roots. So that, in short, is why I like being Anglican. And all the cool kids are doing it. N.T. Wright, John Stott, Alistair McGrath, C.S. Lewis. On the way over, I just listened to your podcast with Tish Warren.
Yeah.
People are doing it. And if you want to be cool, you should do it too. Because it's cool. You don't have to go to Denver to be cool. You can be Anglican everywhere.
Well, I'm still, I won't even get into my whole church past or present or future, but of all the traditional denominations, I've often said that I think the Anglican church is probably the most attractive to me for various reasons. A lot of what you hit on. I think the flexibility.
Men in purple, Preston.
There we go.
And women in purple too.
I just want to wear that cool color. Like I feel like people would finally respect me for once.
You're sitting there with your neck all exposed. It's an anathema to God. It's an anathema, Preston.
So are you ordained in the Anglican church then? You're an Anglican priest then? Is that?
Yes, I am an Anglican priest.
That just sounds sexy in 2019. An Anglican priest.
It does. I go to places where they call me Father Mike, and it does sound a bit weird because I'm in the Anglo-Catholics of our tradition. They do like the Father Mike, that type of thing. I only use Father Mike when I'm pulled over by police, and they say, "What's your name, son? You can call me Father Mike."
Yeah.
That's any time I pull out that language.
What is real quick, you mentioned in passing Reformed. Would you consider yourself Reformed, and what does that mean to you when you say that?
Yeah, well, that means so many. Like the word evangelical, it's a little bit loaded. There's different types of Reformed. There's Reformed in the sense of the German Evangelisch, That means basically not Catholic,
Yeah.
which is a very broad, meaningless. Then there's also Reformed, meaning holding to the sort of Protestant traditional confessions of the church, Westminster Confession, London Baptist Confession. And then there's the more cultural sense of Reformed, in the sense of being, vaguely Calvinistic. And then you've got what I call the viciously Reformed, people who are very Calvinistic and very, very angry about it for some reason. I mean, this is the way I'd explain my Reformedness, or my idea of Calvinism is basically this: people suck. They suck in their sins. They are suckiness unto death. And the God who is rich in mercy takes the initiative to save them when they cannot save themselves. That is pretty much my Calvinism. The rest is commentary.
I cannot agree with that more. I consider, I wrote a blog a while back on why I'm lower, reformed but not reformed, like why I'm lowercase r reformed but not capital R reformed, meaning there's a lot of cultural, in particular American baggage that comes with that label of being reformed. And I just don't fit in those communities, even if on paper we might sign off on 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 doctrinal points. Just the manner in which we sign off on those, mine's going to be much more like, yes, this is where I'm at now, but I might not be there next week. Whereas for other people, it's kind of like, this is where I am, and if I'm not here anymore, I might not be a Christian, kind of thing, which is just ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to get away from the idea of Reformed basically means holding to the main tenets of the Synod of Dort, the 5 points of Calvinism, while having thick glasses, a big beard, a flannelette shirt, and kind of tight jeans, and drinking craft beer. I don't think that's what Calvin had in mind when he was reforming the Church of Geneva.
Well, Calvin was a wine drinker too. I think he had how many gallons of wine written into his church contract?
Oh, his contract, his annual contract. So much wine. Yeah.
You've also changed on your view of women's, whatever phrase you want to use, women ordination. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would describe myself as a recovering misogynist, to put it bluntly. I did not have a good relationship with women growing up. My mother could be a very kind, loving, and selfless woman, but sadly she was also a very angry drunk. So I grew up having a very difficult relationship with my mother, and then I had a difficult relationship with everyone. I mean, till I was about 20 years old, I was convinced all women hated me, because I pretty much had no female friends. I was kind of like a bit awkward and strange. I didn't have any sisters, had no real female friends, and which was kind of sad, because they looked nice and they had strange curves and they often smelled nice. So it was kind of sad in that sense. But eventually I developed a few more social skills. Eventually met a wonderful a young lady called Naomi, who agreed to marry me. The secret to the longevity of my marriage is making sure that my wife never goes to an optometrist. I just tell her everything. Everyone sees things blurry up close and perfectly. And because I had that kind of, that sort of background, I took to a real hard complementarianism very quickly and very easily. Not the kind of, more extreme versions, but a very conservative kind of Piper Grudem sort of complementarianism.
Okay.
But a number of things changed my thinking on that. One was, I was a part of a very good church, but they kind of like banned women leading worship during Bible studies. Like even like talking with a lady with a guitar leading a few songs of Kumbaya, which I'm pretty sure is not what Paul was worried about. Yeah. And then I went through and read Romans 16, and I remember thinking to myself, man, if Paul did not want women preaching, then why did he send, Phoebe to deliver this letter? Who's probably the first woman not just to deliver it, but also to explain what the letter was about, given what we know of letter carriers in antiquity. Yeah. Then you've got the other women. You've got Junia, you've got Mary, all the co-workers there using the same language he uses to describe Timothy and Titus. I was convinced that 1 Timothy 2 is an opaque text. I think, women will be saved through childbirth. I think that's echoing something of the heresy in Ephesus. It's quite specific. So I didn't see in 1 Timothy 2 a broad blanket prohibition of women teaching men always and forever. I think this is rooted in the particular context of Ephesus. If not, then I don't know how to make sense of the rest of Paul's writings about women and his co-workers. So I came to the conviction that women can participate in the didactic life of the church. They can lead the teaching life of the church, and they can serve in the highest positions of ministry in the church. In fact, I wrote I kind of set out a case for this in a short little booklet, which I think's got a catchy title called "Bourgeois Babes, Bossy Wives, and Bobby Haircuts." A case for gender equality in ministry. If you want to buy a book that's got the word babes in it, this is the one to buy. This is the one book about babes your wife won't mind you buying.
Or bossy wives. So it's an ebook published by Zondervan, is that correct? Or is it an actual paper book?
It's both. It's both. You can get it as an ebook, but it's also available as like a little booklet. And that's pretty much where I set out the case. And I keep getting emails from people who have read that. A lot of people have read that book. It's only like 7,000 words or something. It's like an extended essay. But a lot of people have written to me saying, wow, this book was life-changing for me. Seeing how you can maintain a very high view of Scripture, a very rigorous biblical interpretation.
Yeah.
But believe that spiritual gifts do not come in pink and blue. The Spirit's been poured on all flesh, and our sons and daughters will prophesy.
Yeah.
And I would say probably my biggest critique of complementarianism these days would be this: that the so-called biblical manhood and womanhood is really a post-World War II reflection of white middle-class suburban culture.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, like I talk to people I've got students from Sudan, from Asia, other parts of the world, and the idea that dad goes to work, mum stays at home, looks after the kids, that only works in a very affluent and consumerist society. Everywhere else, mum and dad works. Maybe mum works for the government, or dad works on the farm, or that sort of thing. Grandma's still at home. And grandma may be calling the shots because you're living in a matriarchal culture or something like that. That there is just a far wider assortment of cultures than the one that we live in. And you've got to think, well, how do the household codes relate to that context? China is very easy. China is a very egalitarian culture in some ways, which it's absorbed in various ways. So, trying to get a real hardcore complementarians on some people from certain parts of China is very difficult. It does not resonate, since in their view, women hold up half the sky, that kind of a thing. So, I became disenchanted with it. I mean, at the same time, there's different types of complementarian as well. We shouldn't pigeonhole them all in the same point. And, I've got colleagues and friends who are complementarian, and we have a few good discussions here and there. But I think it is possible, even in a seminary, to have different views about the roles and qualifications for ministry and still get along with each other.
No, that's so good. I often, and I've said this so many times in the podcast, I don't want to get into it, but I mean, I'm officially pleading the fifth. That's an American phrase, I guess. I'm sure you know, but like, I was raised like you, heavy complementarian. Never had the personal disdain for women. In fact, I did kind of find it odd and very patriarchal that men were kind of running a show, but I never really questioned it, just because I respected everybody, and I, 1 Timothy 2, whatever. Long story short, I'm right now, there's so many people I haven't done the work to know where I land, but I often tell people the fact that people like Michael Bird and N.T. Wright and several others who are so biblically centered, who I see eye to eye on theologically on so many levels, the fact that they are no longer complementarian or egalitarian, whatever phrase you want to use, non-hierarchical complementarian, one of my friends uses, that to me, I'm like, okay, there must be something to the egalitarian view that I haven't seen yet. So I'm officially like, I'm not sure where I'm going to land. I need some space in my life to study it out. I haven't read your book. I've seen it since it came out. And I've always like eyed it and just haven't taken the time to read it. So I'm going to take the time to read that one as well. So there's 2 Michael Bird books now that I have publicly agreed to read in the next year or so. So yeah, maybe you can. So here, I guess, on the egalitarian side, to me, and I hate saying this, but just aside from Scripture, it makes 0 sense why only men would be qualified or called or able to serve in positions of leadership. Even if, and this is going to spill into gender studies or whatever, even if males stereotypically or generally are more hardwired at being qualified for leadership kind of roles, any psychologist worth his or her salt is going to say that's still a generality. There are still, yes, even if men are generally more emotionally stable than women, yes, even though men don't experience, a period and that plays with your emotions, yes, even though there are these generalities, they're not absolutes. There are still some men that would exhibit more typically feminine emotional characteristics, whatever, and there are some women that would exhibit some typically masculine characteristics. So it doesn't make sense to me to make a categorical declaration that all women 100% always are not qualified or called to leadership. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Now I'm still a biblicist, to where if the Bible says it, I'll believe it and go with it, but it doesn't make sense that all females would be excluded. It might make sense that 70% of leaders might be male. I'm okay with that. I respect sex differences. It doesn't make sense that 100% would. So that would be my one major concern with the complementarian position. On the flip side, on the arguments, I often hear arguments for egalitarian or women's ordination begin with something like, well, I used to be a complementarian, but then I met a woman who was an amazing preacher and teacher and theologian, and therefore it kind of changed my view. I'm like, okay, I see that, but that's not technically a scriptural argument. In fact, that's why so many Christians are affirming of same-sex relationships now. Well, I used to be affirm traditional marriage, but then I met a bunch of gay couples that were amazing, and now, it's like, okay, I get the power of that, but that's not really a scriptural argument.
Yeah.
And also, it does. So respond to this, and I really want you to convince me otherwise. Jesus, especially Jesus, seemed to push back against the patriarchal culture, elevating women. I mean, Luke 8 with being supported by women, and the Mary and Martha, and so on it goes, and Paul and Phoebe, as you mentioned, and all these others. The New Testament doesn't seem to shrink back against pushing back against the patriarchal culture. Why is it then that we still have all male apostles? And I would say we still have, and you might throw in Junia and we can go there, and we still have no, can I say this and critique me, no clear example of a female in a elder or pastoral or teaching role in a local church context. Aside from female prophets, and I'm not sure where they would fit in. But you have Paul's letter to Timothy and Titus, not Carol or Mary, and you clearly have all male. Why don't we have 6 female apostles? Even if you take Junia, it's like, okay, why don't we have 6 Junias? Or there still does seem to be a trajectory of male leaders in the sense of what we're talking about today, of like occupying the office of eldership or
I mean, I think the issue is, Preston, when we look at the New Testament and the first Christians, we want to know why they weren't more like us. Why isn't Jesus traveling around preaching smash the patriarchy, hashtag slave lives matter, occupy Rome? We want them to be just like us, and for our concerns to be their concerns, our priorities to be their priorities. So we're kind of saying, how come they were not like us? Because obviously we are the normal Christians. They were just like the John the Baptist preparing the way for us, that type of thing. We've got to remember that they're dealing with faith, God, the realities, the imperatives of their world as they understood it. And we look back and like, well, how could you treat slavery as if it's like a normal thing? How can you talk about patriarchy as if it's if it's normal. That was the only world they knew. And they may not have conceived of another world. And God speaks into that world, into that context, with the concerns that they had. Now, I do think you see things that start to change the trajectory of things. I think we see that with Paul and slavery. I mean, Paul, as I've said, Paul was no William Wilberforce, but without Paul, I don't think we would have had William Wilberforce. Paul was, I wouldn't call, Paul a kind of a radical feminist, but as anyone can tell you, Tom Holland's recent book, Dominion, is a lot of what we believe on right values in our world today goes back to people like the Apostle Paul. Okay, some of the things he's saying. Christ, there's neither, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male and female. A lot of this goes back to Paul, and what happens as a result of this slowly being absorbed into an entire civilization, millennia. So I don't think we should expect that they're going to have the complete package that we have after 2,000 years of germination, all there at the embryonic stages. So I'm not so much concerned how come the later package is not there at the beginning. What for me is clear is that things are already happening there. And I would push back a little bit on your President. Say, look, they did have female prophets. There are also women leading Christian households, like Chloe in 1 Corinthians, Nympha in
Hey,
just
Mike,
the ones
Mike,
about.
real quick. It's whenever you turn your face away, I lose your voice. So just
okay, sorry.
Yeah. I picked up on where the glitch is. Yeah. So just
okay. Do I need to say anything again?
So go back. So Chloe, women leading households. Yeah.
Yep. So I would push back a bit and say, no, we do have women leaders. We have female prophets. We have female leaders like Chloe in Corinth, Nympha in Colossae, and all these various these other workers that Paul nominates in Romans 16 and in Philippians 4 and the like. So yeah, I do see women involved. And if house churches were kind of coterminous with households, I think we have the reality of women household leaders. Now, Paul doesn't come out and say that because he didn't have to. It was just assumed it was well known.
So that's, I guess, here's what I don't know. And then we can also assume, I think Lydia in Philippians 16, right? Probably a wealthy woman. I've always thought that those women household who were opening up their homes, these wealthy women who are opening up their homes for believers to gather, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were leading the house church in a didactic pastoral role. I've always assumed that, yes, a wealthy woman could open up her house, have people gather, but that doesn't necessarily mean she's overseeing that household gathering in the 1 Timothy 3 kind of sense. Am I wrong in that assumption? Is that a leap is that a valid leap you're making, but a leap nonetheless? Or is there evidence that, no, if you actually own the home or believe you're meeting, you are by definition also leading that congregation? Yeah,
well, at one level, I have to say there are some blanks in the gaps here that we don't know. But let me compare 2 examples, okay? We know that Paul writes to Philemon, and I think his was it wife Apphia or sister Apphia, and then he refers to the dude Archippus. Yeah. Okay. Now the impression you get is Philemon is the patron, and Archippus is kind of like the pastoral leader in that house church. Okay. That's where there is a difference between the patron and, you might say, the pastoral leader, although it's a kind of a different relationship. However, when Paul mentions these women, like Chloe and also Nympha, he doesn't mention and so who's the pastoral leader there. He doesn't mention an Archippus type figure. He just mentions Nympha. He just mentions Chloe, and he doesn't mention and who the pastoral leader, like an Archippus figure. So that would suggest to me that they probably were a leader of some type in that church, or a senior leader. Maybe not the only one, but they're the one person that he mentioned. And I think their role went more than just setting up the chairs in the nice triclinium and putting out the flowers. I think they had some degree of authority over that, which is why Paul mentions them. Paul mentions the people are those who have the authority, not just those in the teaching role, those who have an authority and a responsibility for what's going on in the house church.
So if the household host, whatever, was not the leader, then Paul probably would have identified both the household host and the leader. But if he doesn't distinguish between those two, and we do have evidence where he does distinguish between the person who owns the house, opens the doors, versus the one who that's it's these kind of arguments that I want to wrestle with. Because I mean, to be honest, I desperately want to be fully and passionately egalitarian. It makes more sense to me, and yet I am enough of a biblicist that I don't want to just do so because of not unbiblical, but non-biblical kind of reasons. I mean, it doesn't make sense that all women categorically 100% would be excluded from teaching roles, even if the majority might be men, maybe. It just doesn't make sense. So 1 Corinthians 14 is never, well, it's 1 Corinthians 14 is an issue for everybody. Women be silent in churches, go ask your husband. So what do the single women do? Literally silent? Like, can they not pray out loud? Can they not raise their hand and ask a question? I mean, it's just, it's a bizarre verse. So I don't think conservatives or complementarians can just take that as proof, whatever. So really it does come down to, in my mind, 1 Timothy 2, and then also the kind of, well, I need to rethink the whole household thing, but the lack of crystal clear evidence that there were women in a didactic kind of authoritative teaching role. But then female prophets, to me, I even asked Tom Schreiner once. I said, okay, Tom, give me, what do you think is the best argument for the egalitarian position? As you and I both know, I mean, he's passionately complementarian, and he immediately says female prophets. And he was very honest. He's like, we don't know what to do with that. Like, we have to say that that's not an authoritative role. But he kind of said, you know, with a glimmer and a twinkle in his eye, like, a prophet is not authoritative. Like that's a tough one for us, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I had when my Bourgeois Babes book came, it sounds so dodgy, doesn't it? When my Bourgeois Babes book came out. One guy said, he said, well, there's two types of prophecy. There's kind of like, you know, Isaiah prophecy. And then there's what's he called it congregationally based suggestions. So he said there's two types of prophecy. There's, you know, real good proper prophecy, and then there's the second type of prophecy, congregationally based suggestions. Because if women can do it, it obviously can't be that important. That was basically.
Is that the argument? That's horrible.
That was his argument. Well, there must be a different type of prophecy, because if women can do it, it can't be all that important.
That's the most circular thing I've ever heard. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's. We have a few more minutes, but so you're obviously Australian. You've lived in and ministered in the UK. You've spent a lot of time in the US, teaching and speaking and preaching and so on. Give us an outsider's perspective on American evangelicalism. And I'm going to leave that as broad as it sounds, because I want you to take any kind of approaches you want. When you think of American evangelicalism from an outsider, Jesus-loving, gospel-centered, biblical scholar perspective, what would you want to say to my audience, who is, let's just say, 80% American evangelical?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I love America. I think America's great. It's the land that invented Chick-fil-A. So I'm a big American fan. I would say American evangelicalism, at one level, it is so broad as to be practically meaningless. I have to explain to Australians that everything they know about evangelicalism is pretty much wrong. It's not the caricature and the stereotype they give. American evangelicalism has the best and the worst of American religious culture. So that they've got Preston Sprinkles and Joey Dodsons. Or is it Joey Dodson and Preston Sprinkle? I can't remember which one's the bad one. They've got the best and the worst of everything in abundance. I would say one thing is, I think Americans need to be able to discern better what does it mean to be Christian and what does it mean to be American. In other words, I find them not very good at distinguishing between what is Christian and what is American. And I'm never more than aware of this when I'm discussing two issues with Americans, which is healthcare and gun control. Not that I want to offend everyone, but let me put this to you. Every Western democracy from Norway to New Zealand has universal healthcare for its citizens, except for the wealthiest nation on earth. Now, healthcare is complex. The American system as it exists complex. But, the idea that it's just inherently wrong to have a universal healthcare. Christians in Norway, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, no one else thinks that. It's only you people. And the same on the gun stuff. Like, I understand the role of guns in American culture going back to the War of Independence. I understand, you've got your Second Amendment, so it's got a particular legal thing, the right to bear arms for militias. You've got a land border with Mexico, and there is a lot of bad hombres coming across the border, so I understand part of that. But who wants to live in a country where you have a mass shooting like every week? And who needs an AR-15 to go home? I mean, look, I'm not some ultra left-wing tree-hugging femo-Nazi from Yale. I'm a military man. Okay. Well, actually, here's why I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist. I believe there is a place for lethal force, sadly, in this world. But I don't know why anyone needs to have an AR-15, that type of a thing. Whether it's hunting or protection, I think a bolt-action rifle or a shotgun will kind of do the job. And I just look at America, and I think some of these issues, I think, wow, you people are strange, and you think we're the crazy ones, type of a thing. So that there's some issues like that. I think America is now more polarized than ever before. And it's vitriol, violent. I mean, there seems to be a lot of revenge fantasy going on. We want to get them. We're going to do this to them. We're going to get them. And I don't know what's going to happen. I just hope we can find a centralist American president, Republican or Democrat, someone who can bring people together and try, create connections and coalitions of like-minded people. And, America needs to do what Paul says in Romans 14:19. And I think this is true of evangelicalism, but also America. We need to pursue the things that make for peace and mutual encouragement. You definitely need a president like that. Whereas I think a lot of people want a kind of what I call the Luke 19:27 president. As for those who did not want me to reign over them, bring them before me and slaughter them. A lot of people want a president as that is his motto, Luke 19:27. But I think we need more like a Romans 14:19 president in the future. But, I love my American friends. I always have a great time when I go to America. And there is power, wonder-working power in the American Evangelical Church.
Mike, that's a great word to end on. Thanks so much for being on the show. One of these days, we got to hang out in person. I spent 5 weeks at your home in Australia, sans Michael Bird. And
my house still smells like Budweiser and Old Spice.
I tried to replenish all the wine that I drank when I was at your house. I don't think I did so well on the espresso machine because I pretty much.
I could not care less. I don't know, Preston, but I hate coffee. I despise coffee.
Oh, really?
My feelings about coffee are very similar to how Nancy Pelosi feels about Donald Trump. I mean, I really do. I will not kiss my wife after she's had coffee.
Well, tell Naomi I'm sorry for drinking all her. We had plans to replenish, and then we went out the night before, and I just specifically remember that stores were not open. There was some bank holiday or whatever, and I was like, oh my gosh.
You busted your ankle up real bad as well.
Oh gosh. So right out, your neighborhood, as you come out of your street, if you turn right and then another right and then the main road on the left, I forget that road. What's that road?
George's Road.
Yes, George's. About a quarter mile down, there's a little bus stop, and so there's a shadow on the curb right there, which hid the curb, and I stepped off it, rolled my ankle both ways. I still, a year and a half later, it's like 80%. Trashed it. Trashed. The doctor said he's never seen an ankle injury so bad from just stepping off a curb on a jog. So.
Oh, wow.
Fun memories in Australia.
Yeah, so let me get, you came to Australia, and it wasn't the jellyfish, the crocodiles, the snakes, or the dingoes. It was the bus stop that got you.
It was the
And we
curve.
put a travel warning. You know, dear American
my
tourists, forget
Lord.
the dingoes. Beware of the bus stops. Those things are a killer.
The shadows.
They will cripple you. They will cripple you.
Mike, thanks so much for being on the show. We'll have to do this again sometime. Many blessings on your life, your ministry, and especially your publishing output. I hope you keep cranking out as many books as you've been doing.
Thank you, Preston. It's always good to connect with a great buddy.
All right. Take care, man. See ya.
Bye.